On the evening of December 31st, the Griffin house was filled with warm light from the Christmas decorations. Peter was laughing loudly at the TV, Lois was setting the table, Stewie was busy with one of his toys, and Brian was sitting on the couch, staring out the window. Snow was falling slowly, and something about it felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Brian didn't want to stay home. He said he was going out for a walk and would celebrate the new year somewhere else. No one really paid attention. The door closed and the sound of his footsteps disappeared into the night. Outside, the streets were almost empty. Streetlights glowed weakly, and Christmas lights flickered with a slight delay, as if time itself was off. Brian walked farther and farther from familiar houses. He didn't notice when he turned the wrong way. The neighborhood looked like Quahog, but not quite, like a faded copy. Identical houses, dark windows, no cars, no people. His phone showed 11:58 p.m. The time didn't change. Brian noticed one house decorated for the holidays, but too perfectly. The Christmas tree in the window stood unnaturally straight. The lights didn't blink, they just glowed with a cold, steady color. The front door was slightly open. Brian hesitated, then stepped inside. The house was silent. No music, no ticking clocks, just the feeling that something was watching him. In the mirror, Brian saw himself and quickly looked away because the reflection kept staring. When he tried to leave, the door was still there, but the handle wouldn't move. The lights went out. Then he heard something. Not a voice, but an echo of his own thoughts. What happened that night was never fully known. In the morning, Lois noticed Brian sitting in the living room. He was in his usual spot, but something felt wrong. He wasn't watching TV, he wasn't moving. He was just staring at the Christmas tree. His eyes were different, not angry, empty. When Lois spoke to him, he slowly turned his head. His voice sounded normal, but the words felt strange, like he was repeating sentences without understanding them. As the hours passed, Brian seemed less and less like himself. He knew where things were, but didn't know why. He said everyone's names correctly, but looked at them like strangers. Sometimes he froze and stared into a corner of the room where nothing was there. At midnight, the new year arrived. At that exact moment, Brian stood up and smiled. Too late, too slowly. The lights in the house flickered and went out forever. The next day, the house was empty. The Christmas tree was still glowing. On the couch sat Brian, or something that looked like him. It was waiting. The episode starts quietly. Late at night, Peter comes downstairs to get a glass of water. As he walks into the kitchen, he notices Brian sitting by the window in complete darkness, completely still, like a statue. Peter flips the light on, and Brian slowly turns his head with a slight delay, as if his muscles aren't responding right. Peter asks if everything's okay. Brian smiles a little too widely and says, "Yeah, just listening." "Listening to who?" Peter asks. "The house," Brian replies. The next morning, Brian acts normal, but something is undeniably off. He doesn't answer when spoken to, as if he's busy listening to something inside his own mind. He barely blinks, and when he does, it's slow and unnatural. The fur on his neck is permanently raised, as if sensing something invisible. Lois notices he's been walking around the house at night. Heavy, long footsteps that sound like a much bigger animal. One day, Meg tries to pet Brian, but he jerks back suddenly, and his pupils expand instantly, covering almost the entire eye. For a split second, he looks like he doesn't recognize her at all. Then, in a calm monotone, he says, "I shouldn't. I'm changing." That evening, Brian stops eating regular dog food. Instead, he sits by the refrigerator, listening to the hum of the motor like it's whispering something important. Peter jokes about it, but later that night he hears Brian scratching loudly across the floor, not with paws, but with something long and sharp, like claws. By the next morning, Brian is bigger, much bigger. His chest looks broader, his footsteps heavier. He moves like he's adjusting to new muscles he didn't have before. His eyes shine with a faint glassy glow. Lois suddenly realizes Stewie is missing. His room is empty. No crib, no toys, no trace of him. Only one broken toy on the floor. Panicking, Peter runs to Brian. "Did you see Stewie? Where is he?" Brian lifts his head slowly and a strange sound escapes him. Half laugh, half growl. "He took care of things," Brian says calmly. Peter tears through the house searching for Stewie, calling his name. Brian follows him everywhere, towering over him now, his head nearly brushing the door frames. His movements are slow, controlled, confident, like he already knows Peter won't find anything. At night, Peter checks the basement, hoping for any clue. But it's dark and too quiet. When he turns around, the door shuts by itself. Brian stands at the top of the stairs, massive, almost human tall. His shadow fills the entire doorway. His fur bristles like a mane, and his eyes glow faintly as he speaks. "The house told me," he says gently, "told me what I'm supposed to become." Peter steps back in terror as Brian begins descending the stairs one step at a time. Each one shakes the basement slightly. "You're not Brian," Peter whispers. Brian smiles, his mouth stretching too far. "I'm better." The light flickers, the sound cuts out. The screen goes black. A final post-credits shot appears. It's nighttime in the Griffin living room. An enormous creature, Brian's final form, sits calmly on the couch, breathing slowly. His silhouette is monstrous, but he sits like a person. The house is silent. There is no Peter, no Lois, no Stewie, only Brian, and the sound of his slow, heavy breathing. The episode begins with Stewie hearing a strange sound in his room. A faint, static crackling coming from his old baby monitor, the one no one has touched in months. It sits on his shelf, dusty, long forgotten. Late at night, just as Stewie is about to fall asleep, the monitor suddenly turns on by itself. A weak, trembling voice comes through. "Stewie, can you hear me?" Stewie jumps up and grabs the monitor. "Who is this?" The voice is faint, muffled, as if speaking from far away, or from somewhere below the house. "Everything will change soon. I came early to warn you." The next morning, Stewie tries to tell Lois and Peter that someone is speaking to him through the baby monitor. They laugh it off. Peter says it's probably some neighbor messing around, and Lois insists it's just interference. Stewie tries to explain that it didn't sound like interference at all, but they don't take him seriously. Night after night, the voice returns. "You're alone, Stewie. No one hears you but me." Each time it grows more confident, as if it understands the house better than anyone living in it. Stewie is scared, but he can't stop listening. He starts carrying the monitor around during the day, afraid he'll miss the next message. One evening, the voice says, "They think you're small. They don't listen to you, but everything is going to change soon. You must be ready." Stewie whispers, "Ready for what?" The voice answers slowly, "It's time for you to take control." Then the monitor goes silent for 2 whole days. Stewie becomes restless. He walks through the hallways, checks every room, listens to the walls. He's certain the voice is somewhere close, maybe even inside the house. On the 3rd night, the monitor turns on by itself again, but this time the voice sounds closer, clearer, as if it's standing right behind the door. "Stewie, it's time. You know what to do. You always knew." Stewie trembles but lifts the monitor to his ear. I'm not sure." The voice becomes firm. "You've already begun. Now continue." The lights in the house flicker. The sounds outside disappear. No cars, no wind, no footsteps. Just heavy silence pressing against the windows. Stewie stands in the middle of the living room, tiny and pale, and for a moment it feels like the whole house is watching him. The screen cuts abruptly. A final scene plays like a post-ending shot. It's morning. The living room is empty. Stewie sits alone on the floor, motionless, staring straight ahead. In his hands, the baby monitor, broken clean in half. Wires exposed, batteries missing, plastic cracked. But Stewie still holds it to his ear, as if he's listening to something only he can hear. It all started the night Stewie heard something moving in his room. He thought it was Brian, but when he turned on his small nightlight, he saw a child standing in the corner. A child who looked almost exactly like him, just a bit taller, a bit paler, with a smile that stayed on his face far too long. The child said, "Hi, brother. I came home." Stewie froze. He didn't have a brother, not one he knew of. But the boy spoke calmly, confidently, as if everything he said made perfect sense. In the morning, Stewie tried to tell Lois, but she brushed it off, though Stewie noticed she wouldn't look him in the eyes. And that evening, the same child was sitting in the kitchen. Lois introduced him as a distant relative who would be staying with them just for a little while. Nobody, not Peter, not Chris, not Meg, not even Brian, remembered anything about him. Yet everyone acted like he'd always been part of the family. Stewie started watching him closely. The brother moved strangely, too smoothly, changing his facial expressions too quickly, like he was selecting them from a menu. He would stand in door frames and stare at people until they noticed him, then walk away without a word. Sometimes he would disappear into a room with no exit, and Stewie would find him moments later in a different part of the house. On the third day, Meg disappeared. Her door was open, her belongings untouched, but she was gone. When Stewie accused the brother, the boy only tilted his head and said, "You'll understand soon, too." Peter became vacant. He would sit on the couch and stare at nothing, like someone had unplugged his thoughts. Chris wandered the house silently, saying nothing to anyone. Lois followed the new child everywhere, moving as if hypnotized. On the fourth day, Chris vanished. Stewie tried to talk to Brian, but Brian walked past him without any recognition at all, like someone had hollowed him out. More and more, the brother appeared behind Stewie even when he locked the door. Some nights, Stewie woke up to find him standing at the foot of the bed, whispering, "We're the same. We belong together." Time stopped making sense. All the clocks froze at the same hour. The windows showed nothing but a flat gray mist. The house wasn't physically locked. It simply wouldn't let them leave. When Lois disappeared, Stewie finally went to the basement, the only place the brother never entered. In the far corner, he found Peter, beaten, exhausted, barely conscious. When he saw Stewie, he whispered, "That thing isn't your brother. It's not a child. It came here because of you." Stewie demanded to know what that meant, but Peter only repeated, "Don't look it in the eyes. Whatever you do, don't look." Footsteps sounded above them, soft, gentle, too controlled. Stewie and Peter turned toward the stairs as the brother began to descend. But with each step, his body seemed to grow slightly taller, slightly more stretched. It all started so suddenly. One morning, Peter woke up in an unbelievably good mood. Not just cheerful, unnaturally cheerful. He smiled wider than usual, spoke in a soft, polite tone, cleaned the breakfast dishes without being asked, and complimented everyone for the smallest things. Even Lois admitted she liked this new Peter. He asked Chris about his day. He helped Meg pack for school and told her she deserved to feel appreciated. He picked Stewie up and hugged him, gently, evenly, a little too long. The family adored him. No one questioned it. Only Brian watched him carefully, though he didn't say anything. Day by day, Peter became increasingly perfect. He anticipated everyone's needs before they spoke. He timed breakfast perfectly, cleaned the house top to bottom, never raised his voice, never argued, never complained. But the strangest part was that his smile never left his face. Even when he thought no one was looking, his expression remained fixed, stretched, smooth, almost glued in place. One night, Lois woke up and saw Peter standing in the hallway with his back toward her. Completely still, completely silent. When she asked what he was doing, he turned his head far too slowly and said, "Just watching over the family, making sure everyone is safe." By the third day, the house itself began to react to him. Lights flickered whenever he walked past. The TV turned on the moment he sat in his recliner. Sometimes his shadow stretched strangely across the wall, taller, sharper. But whenever Lois blinked, it snapped back to normal. The kids didn't notice any of it. They said, "Dad's just better now." But Lois couldn't shake the feeling that something about him was too good, too controlled. One afternoon, she went down to the basement to find an old box, despite Peter telling her more than once, "Please don't go down there yet. I'm fixing something." The basement door was cracked open. She stepped inside. The single bulb hummed weakly overhead, and in the far corner, slumped against the wall, was Peter, the real Peter. Dirty, exhausted, wrists tied, shirt torn. He lifted his head slowly and whispered, "Lois, that thing upstairs isn't me. Please don't trust him." Lois stumbled toward him, trembling, when she heard footsteps above her, slow, steady, confident. The basement lights sputtered. Then the false Peter appeared at the top of the stairs. The perfect one, the smiling one. His expression didn't change at all. His eyes reflected the basement bulb like polished glass. "Lois," he said softly, "there's no need to worry. I'm the better version." She shielded the real Peter with her body. She tried to ask who or what he was, but nothing came out. The false Peter took one step down, then another. His smile stretched slightly wider, past the point where a normal face should move. "You both stay here," he said calmly. "The family needs someone who does everything right." The door slammed shut. The lock clicked from the outside. Lois pounded on it, screaming, but the house did not respond. The lights flickered, then went out. The final shot of the episode was the living room. The kids sat quietly beside the new Peter. He gently patted Meg's head, straightened Chris's collar, and held Stewie on his knee. They smiled. They leaned into him. They accepted him. Nobody asked why their father no longer blinked. Nobody noticed that he never once stopped smiling. The episode cut to black. It all started when Peter noticed something small, almost too small to care about. But it stuck with him. Brian yawned after lunch, and for a brief second Peter saw two long, sharp fangs in his mouth. Not like a dog's, too smooth, too perfect, too deliberate. Peter asked if he was okay, but Brian immediately shut his mouth and said, "You're imagining things." His tone was calm. Too calm. That night, Peter heard Brian's claws scraping across the floor. Much louder than usual, like the claws had somehow grown. The next day, something was off in the house. Brian spoke less, stayed in darker corners, and watched the family with a strange stillness. When Lois asked if he was sick, he simply said, "I'm adjusting." Adjusting to what? He didn't explain. That same evening, Meg disappeared. Her room was untouched, her phone charging, her lights on. But she was gone without a trace. Peter panicked, but Brian said quietly, "She left. It's fine." His voice was deeper, layered, as if more than one voice was speaking through him. Peter felt fear rise in his chest, but no one else in the family reacted at all. By the third day, Brian's movements had changed. He didn't just walk, he glided, moving too smoothly for a living creature. His shadow on the wall stretched wider and taller than he was, and at night, Peter heard his breathing from multiple corners of the room at once, as though Brian existed in more than one place. Then Chris disappeared. Then Lois. Their chairs were neatly pushed in, their beds made, nothing disturbed. Yet the house felt heavier. like the air had thickened. Their voices had filled the home just hours earlier, and now there was only empty silence. Peter ran from room to room, shouting their names, but the house swallowed the sound, muffling his calls. Brian barely spoke anymore. He only watched Peter. From doorways, from the top of the stairs, sometimes from right behind him without making a sound. And each time Peter saw him, he looked larger, broader, taller, as if he was outgrowing the shape of a dog. One morning, Peter woke up and realized there was no one left but them. Everyone had vanished quietly, like a TV muting itself mid-scene. He found Brian in the living room, or rather, the thing that had once been Brian. An enormous creature stood there on 4 massive limbs. Its fur bristled upward like jagged spikes. Its jaw was elongated and too wide, filled with exposed fangs that didn't fit in its mouth. Its eyes weren't eyes anymore, just deep cavities of shifting shadow. But it still spoke in Brian's voice, softly, calmly, almost kindly. "Peter, now it's just us, the way it's supposed to be." Peter backed away slowly, but the creature moved faster, sliding across the floor without footsteps, its shadow stretching across the entire room like spilled ink. It leaned down over him, and the walls trembled with each breath it took. "Don't be scared," it said. "I finally became what I was meant to be." Peter tried to scream, but no sound came out. The lights flickered once, twice, a third time, and in the final moment, all we see is a massive, shifting shadow engulfing Peter completely. The screen cuts to black,